So I just shared with all the kids the story of Lazarus, and maybe you read the big passage that accompanies the video story for the children, and it's a long and large story. Um, so this was from John chapter 11, and last week when we had the man born blind, that was John chapter 9. And then there's teaching in between in John chapter 10. But there's another Lazarus in I think Luke's gospel, and he's a character in one of the stories, one of the parables that Jesus tells, that this man Lazarus, who was a beggar, his whole life, dies and goes to the afterlife, and he hangs out in the bosom of Abraham. And that parable is an exchange between Lazarus the beggar and the rich man who ignored him his entire life. So go check that out. But just to say that somewhere, it must have been somewhere in the mythology of Jesus, that there was this matter of Lazarus that who is a figure in either Luke's gospel or John's gospel, who is a figure that puts death and life and helps us and puts those two together in both the parable in Luke and both in John's gospel. This story we have in John's gospel, Lazarus helps us deal with this intersection of life and death. In this story, of course, usually the telling is about how Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and if you have a resurrection story, you should tell it, right? It's great. It's always good to have a resurrection story. But at the same time, we need to deal with the fact that Jesus has to confront the fact that Lazarus has died. This is not a healing or a saving from death. This is something different, right? I've always known theologically that church is bigger than the building. I know that. In my intellectual pastoral life, I know the church is bigger than the building. But these last 3 weeks, 2 weeks, I don't know. We're at the beginning of week 3, but this is the 4th church we've done this way, so it's been a long time since I've seen you all. Or is it just the 3rd one? I can't remember. I've lost track. Oh, it's the 5th Sunday. That's why. This is the 4th one and the 5th Sunday. So much of my church life happens either around or because of or through the church building. And so now that we are rendered buildingless, and now that this community of believers known as Orchards United Methodist Church is we can't physically be together, it's really challenging. And I have to admit, and this is part of the reason why I've put myself in the garage a little bit, I have to admit that I have felt grief. I have felt grief. My connection to people is through the church. Almost all of my connections to people is through the church. And maybe that says something about my social anxieties, and it probably does, but it also says something really beautiful about the church, that someone with social anxieties can still have friends, can still have purpose, can still have something to do that's seemingly important. I have shared this before, that I've taken lots of little Myers-Briggs kinds of personality tests, and when it comes to introverted and extroverted, I skew so far to the introversion that I'm almost off the chart, right? And what that means is that not that I don't like people, but like people make me tired, right? And what I've realized is that in this time of separation is that on Sundays I get like 75% of my people fix. And when you leave church, when you all leave church, and I'm the last one there, or I leave early and retreat to the office, sometimes it's like I have a good happy tiredness, and I miss you all. Which brings us to Jesus weeping, because I need to know that God knows our feelings. And I don't need to know that God knows my feelings specifically and exclusively. In fact, it's not good if I think God only knows my feelings exclusively. What I need to know is that God, in this moment in our planet's history, in which so many of us are sick, and even those who aren't sick are scared of getting sick, and those of us who, if you're not scared of getting sick, you're scared of someone else getting sick. All of our frailties and all of our vulnerabilities seem to be getting exposed right now. And I need to know that God knows this. And so we get to this story of Lazarus, and it's in the lectionary. Like, I planned to preach on Lazarus back in January. Like, this was on the schedule. And maybe that's the first part of our revelation, that God is aware. That God is aware. That Jesus cries. That Jesus weeps for someone who has died. And there is a world of hurt right now. And there always is a world of hurt. There's hurt in the world all the time, isn't there? But the scale and scope and the proximity to us right now is pretty stark. But people who have lived in war-torn areas have known this already. People who have lived in refugee camps have known this already, or have wandered this and have needed this lesson that God weeps when we weep. God saves from within our experience. God saves from within our experience. I want to make a little bit of an Ebenezer Scrooge kind of thing out of Lazarus for a moment, because I wonder what his life was like afterwards. I wonder what normalcy he returned to, and I wonder what normalcy he threw out, because it was trite, or because it was meaningless, or because it was a waste of his time. I wonder what new thing he took on in his resurrected life. What new thing did he take on? And I'm wondering what new things we ought to take on. In this current normal, in this current situation, I told you, I think I mentioned last week, that there's dolphins now swimming in the canals in Venice. And I learned this week that the coyotes are starting to roam the empty streets of San Francisco. And they haven't seen coyotes in a long time. And it's like, I always wonder, like, that's kind of cool. Like, the earth is saying, this is what it's like when the humans stop using up everything. I wonder what Lazarus took on differently. And I wonder what we ought to do differently. Oh, I remember. In addition to the coyotes, I've lost like 5 pounds. I've lost 5 pounds, and my back's been hurting all week, so I haven't even gone a lot of walking. It's just I don't do as much snacking. I do a lot of my snacking in the church office, and I'll do a lot of my snacking in the car. And I'm not in a church office, and I'm not in the car. And all of a sudden, I'm like 6 pounds lighter than I was. And I don't want to go back to. I want to make sure I'm making use of this time. So here's your Lenten discipline. Make a list of all those things you're not doing anymore. And maybe give it a grade. Maybe give it a grade. Like, oh, when church comes back, I'm coming back, man, because I miss you all. But I don't have to live with the excess gorging of food. That's my particular vice. I don't have to live with using so much gas. I don't have to do any of that. There is a reality checking happening about what's essential and what's not essential. So maybe this is your Lenten practice for the day, and that is start making a list of all the stuff that you're doing without. And what will you continue to do without? What will you continue to do without? And make a list of all the things that you're taking up. Like we're cooking every day. We're not eating out at all. We're cooking every day. And it turns out that we can manage cooking every day. We don't have to waste money that way. Normalcy will return. But what kind of normalcy will it be? In the meantime, take stock. Just take stock. And whether you are making plans for the new normal or the next normal, or whether you are still feeling the gut punch of this moment in human history, know that God is with us. Whether we are celebrating, sorry if it's silly, or whether we are sad. That's the beginning of the gospel. The fact that Jesus was born among us, took on our flesh, took on all of our problems, took on our weakness, took on our issues, and offered the path back to God through our experiences. Take stock and trust in God. Thanks be to God.